Hey everybody, Jane here, and today I wanted to do a bit of a book review on the book It by Stephen King. I recently enjoyed this book as an audiobook, though I will say it took me a really long time to get through. The audiobook is 40 tracks long on my audio player, so probably it would be like 40 discs if you had it as a CD. And each of those discs was over an hour. So we're talking probably, best guess, at least 50 hours of book. That's a long time. So, for anybody who doesn't know, it is a story about friends who return to their hometown because they made a promise when they were kids. And they don't actually remember a lot of the things about their childhoods or this promise until they return to this town. The town is called Derry. And they learn, and the memories start to come back to them, that when they were children, there was a monster in their town. And they faced the monster, and they had promised that if the monster returned, they would come back to Derry and face it again, kill it. And you have dual timelines of the story of the characters who are adults now and the characters who are childhood friends and their experiences with the monster both times. I ended up giving this book a 3 out of 5. And I guess here's the thing. I have a complicated relationship with Stephen King. I love a lot of his ideas, and this book is really interesting. It's got a cool villain who is a very similar to a boggart, if you're familiar with Harry Potter, as far as it turns into your worst fears. And there's a lot of discussion about the fears of children versus the fears of adults, or like something that stood out to me in the reading was there's a discussion from the monster that grown-up fears are not as concrete as kids, which is one of the reasons that it has more luck preying on children than it does on adults, because children fear monsters and adults fear more existential things. Is there life after death? Can I pay my bills? Am I gonna end up homeless? Am I gonna end up like my mother? All of the things that grown-ups fear are not as tangible. And that makes a lot of sense to me. I have a daughter who for a little while was terrified of zombies. And she was convinced, for reasons I do not understand, that zombies were going to come up out of our drain in the bathroom. And they were going to attack her. And it was the strangest fear I have ever imagined. But it was also obviously much more concrete than the things I, as an adult, worry about. So I loved the discussion of that. I loved the friendships of these characters. These characters came together, all of them kind of with difficult situations or problems. You have Bill, whose brother was a victim of the monster. You have Eddie, whose mother is very neurotic. She's worried about his health. He's her only child, and her entire life evolves around him, but not in a healthy kind of way. You have Stan, who is Jewish and I think gets a little bit of hate from people for being Jewish. You have Bev, who is being physically abused by her father, and her father is very concerned because she's a very pretty girl and he doesn't want her doing bad things. He worries about her, and so he beats her. You have Richie, who's kind of a goofball, a comedian. And then you have Mike, who is Black in a town that is predominantly white. And the last kid, and my mind is completely blanking on his name, is a kid who is new to town and he's overweight and kind of bookish and gets teased a lot about it. So these friends come together, they start playing and having just like a play group, and then they end up taking on this monster as children, led largely by Bill, who again is very angry because this monster killed his brother. When we return as adults, they've all lived very different lives. Eddie is married to a woman who is just like his mother. And I will say I had some issues with how Eddie's wife is portrayed because she's a bigger woman, and Stephen King tends to be very fat phobic. And this is not the first book that we've had that. And I get really tired of his negativity towards and descriptions of fat characters. So I didn't like the way Eddie's wife was portrayed, not because she was heavy, but because of the way King made it sound like she was heavy. And Bev is in an abusive relationship. Richie's doing well as a stand-up comedian. Bill is an author of horror books. The guy who was overweight, he has slimmed down, he looks good, and he's a successful architect. And Mike is now the town librarian, and he is the only one of the friends who has remained in Derry. Oh, and Stan has gotten married. Yeah, he's gotten married and had a successful career. But Mike is the town librarian, and he's the one to call everybody back when murders of children start happening again, or murders that make him suspect that it is back. I think some of the things I say am going to be spoilerish, but this is an old book, and there's been 2 movies, so I don't know that these spoilers are going to be like anything huge, earth-shattering. If you have an inkling of what it is and how it goes, so I'm just going to go ahead and have a really open discussion about that, and if you are opposed to spoilers, this may not be the video for you. Although again, I don't know how many spoilers I'm going to have, I just want to speak freely. So, I was really surprised with Bev that her mother was there, like, existed. Because in the movies, she doesn't ever have a mom. And, like, part of the issue in the movies is usually that she looks a lot like her mom, or, like, you get the impression that she looks a lot like her mom, and that's one of the reasons that her dad hates her. And in the book, her having a mom is almost more creepy, because her mom is not doing a good job of protecting her. And I would have liked to see with each of the characters how they got out of Derry a little bit more. We don't have a lot time frame wise of they left Derry and then they came back. Like, that tends to be a gap. And for something that is 50 hours, we could have had a little bit more discussion on that, because Stephen King just writes long. And some of it adds to the story, and some of it maybe could have been different. Maybe doesn't add as much. So I loved learning about how it had affected Derry before. There have been other murders. There was a fire. There was a shootout with some bad guys. All this other stuff that the clown It was involved in. And so I liked learning about Derry's history. I liked, to a point, the flashbacks from the kids' childhood of the things that happened. I did think sometimes it got overdone. There was a lot more information than I personally needed. Stephen King, like I said, just gets so wordy sometimes, and sometimes I was like, can we just get on with it? Please, can we? But like I said, I felt like there wasn't as much discussion as I would have liked of how did these people get out of Derry. We know that they lose their memory when they get out, but we don't really a couple of them, there's like a comment about this is why their family left, but I don't remember why Bev's family left. Or, well, her dad doesn't leave. I don't know if her parents ended up divorced and Bev left that way, or if she left as an adult. I don't remember. And it might have been mentioned. Like I said, this audiobook was super long, but I would have been interested in maybe a little more background of the characters prior to them, like, leaving Derry, and just maybe a little bit more about what happened while they were out of Derry and as they grew up. Stan dies, and that was fine. I mean, I knew that was coming, so it didn't hit the emotional punch that I think it could have. And when they get back, the characters are basically trying to figure out how to attack it, and it is picking on them. And they think they've been called back by a character called the Turtle. And I'll be really honest, the Turtle was another concept that I felt could have been explained better. We don't really know who the Turtle is, other than we hear multiple times these characters think the Turtle's protecting them. They're being called back by the Turtle. It has told us that the Turtle is dead. And we learn that when they were fighting it before, the Turtle, like, showed up and gave Bill some wisdom. And I'd heard that the Turtle was supposed to be the Turtle from the Discworld series by Terry Pratchett, who has, like, universes on its back, or something similar to that, inspired by Terry Pratchett. So I thought that was interesting. But again, the Turtle is mentioned, but he's not really explored. And I could have handled more exploration of the Turtle. Another thing I think I could have handled a little more explanation of was it. We know it came, I believe it's an alien, it crash landed on Earth. It is a girl, and it is pregnant. Now, I have a couple issues here. One being, with who? Like, how did this thing reproduce? And did it reproduce before it came down? Or is it reproducing asexually? Like, we never know. The kids, the first time they fight it, I guess Stan recognizes that it is a female and it is pregnant, because that's something that they talk about. And then as they're adults, it has laid eggs and they're smashing it. So maybe this thing has just a really long gestation period. But I wasn't really sure. That was strange. And that was underexplained. Now, there's a lot of other stuff in this book that is way over-explained. Especially when it comes to gore, especially when it comes to sexual stuff. One thing with Stephen King, sometimes for me he's a bit gross, and especially with sexual stuff. Like, I could handle a lot of the stuff that happened, but there is a scene where there are two boys, and the one basically starts touching the other, and it just, and Bev watches, and it's just, I don't know, like, that was for me. And there again, everybody is a child here, and that kind of was one that was like a little bit maybe further than I wanted to go. Also, before they fight it as children, Bev has sex with all 6 boys. Not at the same time. Like, they basically kind of, I don't want to say run a train on her, because that's not quite it, because I mean, but it's like one after the other after the other. Now, that's not super described. And I appreciated that that was not super described, because that could have been a lot worse than it was. And I'm glad that was handled tactfully. But still, just so much of the content, for me, I sometimes feel like a lot of that is there, not because it adds to the story, but maybe because King's shooting for shock value. Maybe he's a little bit of a perv, I don't know. But, you know, just certain things just were a little further than I wanted to go. There were also a couple gory scenes that were a little further than I wanted to go. A little further description-wise than I wanted to go. And the homophobia and the racism was a little hard for me also. And again, some of it is important to the story. You know, Mike and him being the only, part of the only black family in this town and the racism they encounter is important to the story. However, I am pretty sure that the N-word is used at least 100 times in this book. At least 100. And one character in particular, the bad guy, Eddie Bowers, when his part of the story is, like, when it's his part, I swear, I was so tired of the N-word being screamed in my ear in that audiobook. Like, it was really annoying. And I just, again, I think, on one hand, I applaud King because he doesn't shy away from anything. But on the other hand, I feel sometimes like he takes it a little too far because he can, and to add shock value. I just had a complicated relationship with it, and I think I have that with a lot of his books. I will still read King because I like what he does as far as looking at different and interesting horrors, looking how horror changes. So yes, this is a monster, but this is a monster that shows us our fears. This is a monster who's wanting to challenge these people because they beat it, who is manipulative, who is not just a mindless walking zombie type monster. It is an interesting character. The characters themselves have backstories, and they're interesting. You know, sometimes in a horror story, you don't get a lot of backstory, you just get kind of boring characters. And even in the movies, you didn't get a real in-depth look at the characters, because there wasn't time. You just got kind of one personality trait or one thing about the characters. And in this, they were developed. We got to see backgrounds of the characters, we got to see their relationships, their friendships, all the dynamics. And that was a cool exploration. And I loved, like I said, the discussion about children's fears and children's belief in magic and how that changes as an adult. Our fears change to things that are more concrete. We lose some of the childhood magic. I did like that. But I struggle because Stephen King is so long. All of his books are way long, and not necessarily, I don't always think they're necessarily long. And sometimes I don't mind the little offshoot directions we're taking. There were times that I really did enjoy that. I enjoyed, for instance, Mike learning about the history of Derry, particularly the fire. And you know, Mike's father's illness, and that was all interesting. But there were just times when I was like, can we hurry up? Can we go through this story? And again, like the shock value stuff, the racism, the sex content, the sexual content, the violence content, I just, it's hard because that stuff kind of sometimes goes a little further than I want to go. And I know everybody's different. I know what works for some people won't work for other people. And it's not that I have a problem with that content being there if it's necessary. But sometimes I feel like the content is there for the shock, not because it adds to the story. It's gratuitous almost. And I do think that's one of the problems I have sometimes with King, is he sometimes gets gratuitous, he sometimes takes a long way around, and sometimes I don't enjoy the ride as much as I could, and as much as I wanted to. But still, like I said, there's still things that even in this 50-hour long audiobook that I wanted a little more explanation of. The turtle. A little bit more about it. Who the heck got it pregnant? I assume another it. Are there more? Are we in danger? Are they coming? I mean, what? If she'd had the babies, what would that have looked like? She's been here for hundreds of years and is immortal, eternal. Why hasn't she had babies yet? What would that look like if she had babies? Maybe she did. Are there other its? Like that, I needed a little more explanation on. And instead I got, Bev's thoughts and feelings as she watches two boys, one more or less molest the other, and then the other one get upset because he likes it, and that he thinks that makes him gay, and then one of the kids gets eaten by it. That's what I got instead of the deeper explanation. And I guess the argument could be made in some cases that there is information that the characters don't fully know. But we get the perspective of it at least once or twice. So I feel like there are other ways that we could have gotten that information. But I had complex feelings. I enjoyed it. I'm not sad I read it. I'll probably read more. I will read them in audiobook because I just can't take it. I can't take it in iRead book. They're too long, they're too meandering, and I just don't have that kind of patience. But as something to listen to while I drive, it's fine. So, yeah, I think those are my thoughts on this and Stephen King in general. I will say the Kings that I've read that I've liked, I liked Misery. I liked Pet Sematary. I really liked Green Mile. I liked Shawshank. I liked Cujo. I had a lot of issues with Cujo, but I've also read that more recently probably than the others. And again, had a lot of issues with it being overwritten, but like looking back on it, I remember during the journey I was really frustrated with it. Looking back on it, I remember I liked it. So I don't dislike King, but I definitely have some frustrations with his style. So yeah, if you've read it, what did you think? Is it one of his best? What are the best Kings? What ones might I really appreciate if I would prefer things that are a little more to the point, a little less sexual content, at least with children. The adults, I don't care what they do. But the kid stuff got a little bit uncomfortable. Which, I mean, here's the thing. Like, I've read Game of Thrones. I'm fine with it being there. I don't know. Something about that particular scene with the boys really kind of was, like, at the edge of where I was comfortable being. Not enough for me to turn it off, but definitely for me to be like, I'm feeling a little bit uncomfortable now. What other books are ones that I should try? Some of the ones that are on my radar are Christine and the Jack Nicholson movie that was made from it that I can't remember now. There's a couple Stephen Kings that I'm interested in trying, but if you have recommendations of his best, please leave them in the comments below. The only King I've read that I remember distinctly not really enjoying was Blaze, and that was written under one of his pen names. So, yeah, please leave your comments about it and about Stephen King, the best Stephen Kings. Also, if there is good horror stories that you could recommend that have the brilliance of the King content, but maybe without the gore and the sexual content and the really long meandering narrative, please leave those down below too. And horror is a genre I don't read much of. I would like to, but I definitely am kind of picky, and I do like King's discussion on life and his terror of things that I can understand and relate to, and discussions on things. The books feel deep, and I want a book in my horror that feels deep. I just want something that is maybe a little bit differently written. But yeah, this has been Jane. I'll see you next time. Bye.